Good morning, everyone. I'm Beth Schrader, Director of Programs Prevention Works. Joining me today in hosting this is Taysa Lynch from Prevention Works, also our Operations Coordinator. We'd like to welcome you to part one of the intersection of prevention, harm reduction, and recovery, which is a collaboration between Prevention Works and Vermont Association of Mental Health, Addiction, and Recovery. And we're super excited to partner with VAMHAR on this project. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Prevention Works, and I see a lot of new faces, we are a network of community prevention leaders, staff, prevention consultants, service providers, and individuals with an interest in and a commitment to substance misuse prevention across the state of Vermont. Prevention Works partners, many of which are on this call, helps shape how substance misuse prevention is valued in our state. And by partnering with PW, as we call it, you lend your commitment and your knowledge and your actions and strength to the prevention world and the public health community in Vermont. Our mission is to unify voices and be a guiding force on policy, practice, and attitudes that promote health and wellness in Vermont. Start again by welcoming Will Roberts, our facilitator for today's webinar. Will actually and I have worked together many, many years ago, so it's nice to work together again. Will is an experienced trainer, facilitator, speaker, and organizer who excels at both communication, creativity, and collaboration. While we're here today. Well-versed in the dialogue education modality and adult learning theory, Will has been working in the field for more than 30 years. They have had great success working with diverse groups and communities. Will derives immense joy from helping and facilitating these groups to acquire skill, knowledge, and a deeper understanding. So join me in welcoming Will Roberts today. Thanks, Will.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, as I said, I adore training. I mean, I have been a trainer for a super long time in lots of different environments, everything from working with domestic and sexual violence survivors to working with crime victims to working in the software industry to working in the world of recovery addiction. So it's really cool. I love my work. I really do love it. So I'm going to share my screen right now, and we're going to go through a PowerPoint. And as I was telling Beth earlier, when I say we're going to go through a PowerPoint, it's not really sort of like what you might be thinking about. So my PowerPoints they are a way to sort of frame everything, but this is going to be a pretty interactive time of it. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to bring this up here, and we're going to start slideshow. So this is part one of our intersections training. So today we're going to be looking at prevention, harm reduction, and recovery, how they are similar, how they are intersect, how they are different. And you're going to get to do some application of that learning with your own self. So I am of course, I'm the Director of Training with the Vermont Association for Mental Health and Addiction Recovery. So what we are, just in a very small little nutshell, what we are is we are a statewide nonprofit who works with other organizations like Prevention Works around mental health and addiction recovery, awareness, best practices. Training is a big part of what we do, but we also do advocacy like at the State House and stuff like that. But we don't really do necessarily any direct service, but we work with folks that do direct service. So that's in a nutshell what we are. I'm going to move some things around here. Okay, that's good. All right, so today's agenda and goals. So this is what we're going to go through. Sort of talked about this a little bit. Is we're going to start off talking just a brief introduction to prevention, harm reduction, and recovery, what those are. Because when we were creating this training, we realized that there were going to be people from all three of these movements, all three of these philosophies. So some people might not know what the other folks do, and so it's always good to break down silos and always good to sort of cross-pollinate. So we're going to talk about what the histories of these three different movements are, their belief systems, that kind of thing. We're going to look at the overlaps and the differences of them. So by the end of the session, you will have reviewed definitions in history. You're going to define and analyze how the three philosophies overlap. You're going to define similarities and differences. And then you're also going to create a list of possible ways to collaborate with each other. All right, so let's start off. We're going to start off talking about prevention. So if you see me ever, I'm just going to give you a piece of logistics here. If you see me ever looking over this way, my notes are on this screen right over here. So I'm actually doing two different screens here. So prevention. So preventing substance misuse by reducing harms across one's lifespan through partnerships, education, community engagement, public policy, and proven best practices. Substance use prevention is based on strategies that increase individual, community, and cultural well-being and resilience. And actually, this definition was developed by Prevention Works, VT, who we are here with, and it's one of many that are adopted by organizations throughout Vermont and nationally. The history behind the prevention movement. So it has a long history and it's evolving. We're going to see this with all of these philosophies. We're going to see this evolve over time, and we're going to look at what that looks like. But it's been a critical component of the public health initiatives aimed at reducing negative impact of drug, alcohol use on individuals, families, and communities. All right, so the early efforts, so this goes way back to the 19th century and the temperance movement, actually, these efforts. Kind of pretty much stayed the same through the 19th and into the 20th century, but a big change here was the war on drugs in the 70s. So that was, the war on drugs was declared by Richard Nixon in the 70s and marked a significant turning point. The thing about it was highly punitive and oftentimes directed at low income and minority groups. And as somebody in the harm reduction movement has said, the war on drugs was really a war on people, right? It really affected low income and minority groups the most out of anything. But there was a shift in the 90s and 2000s. And so then there was a increase in evidence-based practices in substance misuse prevention. So in the 2020s, so most recently, more efforts have been there to encompass a range of strategies, including education, community mobilization, policy change, and treatment services. Let's move on to harm reduction. So some of you might be familiar with this philosophy, others not, which is all good. So harm reduction refers to policies and programs and practices that aim to minimize the negative health, social, and legal impacts associated with drug use, drug policies, and drug laws. Harm reduction is grounded in justice and human rights, and it focuses on positive change and on working with people without judgment, coercion, discrimination, or requiring that people stop using drugs as a precondition of support. And I'm going to say that part, that last little bit again, just because it's an important component of harm reduction. And sometimes if you are not familiar with harm reduction, it kind of blows your mind a little bit. But it's working with people um, and not requiring them to stop using drugs to get support, which is a little bit different than what you might be used to. This quote here comes from the National Harm Reduction Coalition, which is a national advocacy, nonprofit advocacy group that pushes for national change, advocacy around harm reduction practices. So this is a quote from them. We come into harm reduction work and the harm reduction movement from different places: our own personal experiences with drug use, our love or grief for family members and friends, our professional experiences and commitments, and our exposure to injustice. With harm reduction, there's a big political component to it, which is going to keep coming out as we're talking about it. Whatever the pathway, it moves us to look through the veils of stigma and criminalization to see the full humanity and potential of people, including ourselves, that society has deemed deviant, dangerous, and disposable. Harm reduction, this is the history of it, but it's a little bit different than the other histories. Harm reduction finds its roots and inspiration across multiple grassroots movements and strategies emerging across the United States from the 60s through the 80s. From these threads, advocates and activists wove a vision and practice of harm reduction that has spawned a movement that continues to grow. Transformation wasn't and isn't achieved overnight. Transformational work is new to many communities, including harm reduction. And this is a really good example here of this, and this really touches on harm reduction and what it's about. For example, in mixed race settings, we're still learning how to foster an environment of honest inquiry, while simultaneously trying to minimize harm such inquiry might cause to those of us who don't identify with the racial majority, right? So that's a big component of harm reduction right there. So as I said, the National Harm Reduction Coalition's mission is to promote the health and dignity of individuals and communities affected by drug use. As a national advocacy and capacity building organization, they aim to shift power and resources to people most vulnerable to structural violence and racial drug policies. And you could, and I have attended, whole trainings on that very statement right there, right? So that's a big part of harm reduction. They have developed a North Star statement, and this is sort of their guiding principle, and here it is. National Harm Reduction Coalition creates spaces for dialogue and action that help heal the harms caused by racialized drug policies. There was a big component of the war on drugs that harm reduction came out of. And as I said earlier, quote once from a harm reductionist that I know was, harm reduction, war on drugs is really a war on people. So again, foundational principles here is harm reduction incorporates a spectrum of strategies that includes safer use, managed use, abstinence, meeting people who use drugs where they're at, and addressing conditions of use along with the use itself. Because harm reduction demands that interventions and policies designed to serve people who use drugs reflect specific individual community needs, there is no universal definition of or formula for implementing harm reduction strategies. But I will say a big thing for them is meeting people where they're at. That is going into a community, meeting them where they're at, whatever that being at means to them. All right. So with that, I can talk about harm reduction, but I think it's better to hear from actually the National Harm Reduction Coalition themselves. So we've got a video here. It's about 4 minutes long, and it is going to talk about their North Star statement, which I read earlier, and what it means to them. While you're watching the video, here's what I want you to do is make note of how this statement, this North Star statement, influences the coalition's work, and then what is the impact of this statement in the larger community. And then we'll hear some sampling of thoughts after we watch the video.
The first time I heard the North Star statement, I was completely floored because in such a short space of time, with such a short statement, I felt that it applied to my whole life.
The North Star statement is that the Harm Reduction Coalition creates spaces for dialogue and action that help heal the harms of racialized drug policies.
I heard the North Star statement. I felt incredibly seen.
Un documento que habla directamente acerca del impacto del racismo.
North Star statement acknowledges the fact that the U.S. government made policies and laws to police and harm people of color.
The drug policies in America are deeply racist.
He's deeply racist. And so we need to be able to accept that and understand that and not be scared of that.
The North Star statement recognizes that the war on people who use drugs is an intersectional issue.
The statement recognizes the need for action, and it recognizes the need for healing.
I think it's really important to say it and to commit to it out loud.
I got really lucky because I have an immense amount of privilege, and I have a lot of options and a lot of choices that didn't get taken away from me, regardless of my drug use, because of that privilege.
The North Star statement means to me is about giving back to the community.
In line with meeting people where they're at, but not leaving them there, that means that we need to focus our energies on meeting those communities that have been marginalized, left aside, silenced.
Bringing people together and having a dialogue.
Not to only have dialogue, but the Harm Reduction Coalition to be one of the agencies to actually address the systemic issues that create the marginalizations and discriminations within our state community.
The North Star statement is a commitment to change.
This may be hard for some of us to hear, but the harm reduction movement is not immune to institutional racism, no matter how allied we believe that we are.
The North Star statement is a promise on Harm Reduction Coalition's behalf
to undo these policies that grew out of a totally socially unjust racist background.
To keep a focus on how people of color are most impacted by the war on drugs so that we can maintain that at the forefront of all the work that we do.
We're not just fighting to advance harm reduction interventions. We're fighting to address the root causes that lead people to be vulnerable to drug-related harms.
The North Star statement means to me that I work in an organization that has the commitment to address racism head on.
It may also involve conflict, but we shouldn't shy away from that conflict. Without conflict, we can't grow.
The North Star statement is a way forward. It's hope. It's being acknowledged by the people that I work with and alongside in a way that I feel like I haven't ever been in any other movement. So I guess it means everything.
So recovery is a process of change through which people improve their health and wellness, live self-directed lives, striving to reach their full potential. Even people with severe chronic substance use disorders can, with help, overcome their illnesses and regain health and social function. And you notice how I said it in this definition, which is overcoming their illness, it's chronic substance use disorder. I actually don't love the term disorder, but this is the best practice nomenclature for it. But you notice how the naming has sort of shifted here. The language has shifted here to regain health, social function. All right, and that's an important piece of recovery. Being in recovery is when those positive changes and values become part of a voluntarily adopted lifestyle. And it's important to say that while many people in recovery believe that abstinence from all substance use is a cardinal feature of a recovery, others report that handling negative feelings without using substances and living a fulfilling life are what is important in their recovery. So it's a little bit like harm reduction, right? So historically here, similar, the beginning parts, similar with prevention. So starting 19th century in the temperance movement, and then gaining momentum in the 70s and 80s. 80s and 90s, the term recovery gained new meaning through the consumer and survivor movement in mental health and the new recovery advocacy movement in substance use. Early 2000s, so the decade between 2000 2010 saw increased federal activity in the United States focused on defining and promoting recovery in both mental health and substance use. And it's important to bring this event out. So in 2015, the recovery community descended on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., calling for an end to the shame and stigma attached to the disease of addiction and new and better and more supportive recovery nationwide. So there is, I know that you know this, there's a huge amount of stigma attached to addiction and mental health, and recovery really works to take that stigma away or reduce that stigma. So most recently, 2020s, recovery movement continues to embrace and embody the core principles and values of person-centered. So this emphasizes the individual's unique journey and experiences, self-determination, having the right to make choices about their own recovery process. It's kind of a little bit like harm reduction. Hope, that recovery is possible no matter what, and that people can lead fulfilling lives despite challenges. Community inclusion, advocating for the right of individuals to participate fully in mainstream society. And then peer support, recognizing the value of support from people who have lived experience with mental health or substance use challenges. And to that peer support, I want to talk about recovery organizations. So in Vermont, we have recovery organizations. The recovery organizations are places throughout Vermont. It's also national. They sometimes are called, and nationally there might be called different things like recovery centers or recovery organizations like we call them, or something like that. But in Vermont, we call them recovery organizations. And so they are places to find information about substance and alcohol use disorders, various pathways to recovery, and support for families and friends from people with direct personal experience in a safe environment. So Vermont has 14 recovery organizations that serve all 14 of our counties. Once again, recovery organizations help people connect to a recovery community that meets their needs. At each recovery organization, there are people with lived experience in recovery ready to help guests. And we call them guests here. Other places call them participants. Some places call them clients, but most places call them participants or guests, to establish connections, employment, treatment, safe housing, and a multitude of other needs and services. Recovery organizations aren't just for people seeking recovery, but also anyone who is affected by a loved one's substance use. So here's a map of Vermont, and with all of the 14 different organizations that serve all of the counties. So I would like for you just to take a moment to check out the map, and where is your local recovery organization? Which one would you either send people to or go to yourself? All right, so if you could just take a moment to write down, and we sort of were talking about this already, but write down one way that you might use today's information in your work.